Now, I know you're sleepy, but I just bet it'll make you feel right as rain.
Welcome back, everybody. Today we are talking about Severance. This potable magic first aired on Apple TV in 2022, where it was politely sipped by thirsty watchers hesitant of another subscription fee. I risked the monthly fee and was delighted that Apple was once again giving people the electrolytes they crave. I decided last week that it was time to rewatch, to wet my whistle, and again I found myself wanting another taste of that sweet apple juice. If you are unfamiliar with this series, I encourage you to watch it before watching these videos. I have heard many subscribers sharing stories of them watching these videos after each episode and finding that very enjoyable, so I would recommend giving that a try instead of binging either. Watch episode 1 and then come back here, press resume, like we are co-workers talking about our favorite show together. I have seen the complete first season, so when I am reviewing or theory crafting, keep that in mind. I will not spoil what happens in later episodes during this breakdown, but I will highlight the moments when the writing or cinematography or something like that was doing more than what it was on the surface on the first watch, but without any major spoilers or again, anything like that. But without any further ado, let us overthink a Apple TV show about, I don't know, the healthy work-life balance. The first episode starts with Helly on a lifeless table, her status unknown, and a phantom voice waking her up with questions about her identity. This was a mistake, which we will learn about shortly, but it is important to truly understand how massive this mistake could be. In this episode, it's thought that Helly has such a hard time because of Mark's mistake. This lighthearted and disarming, almost activation phase was how she and the others are meant to wake up for the very first time.
Hi there, you on the table. I wonder if you'd mind taking a brief survey? 5 questions. Now, I know you're sleepy, but I just bet it'll make you feel right as rain.
His deviation from the standard process may be why so much of what happens in this season actually happens. Again, no spoilers, but I wanted to note this moment as the Helly incident because it will certainly come up again in these reviews.
I'm sorry, I got ahead of myself.
Instead of a confident speaker, he admits to messing up, he says sorry, he pauses more than he should, and it starts her existence here at Lumon already believing that the people in charge are not as superior as they purport to be. He tries to get back on track, but she ignores him until she realizes that talking is the only way out of this. She asks what she gets after answering his 5 questions, and he says that it depends on her answers. This highlights that the severance procedure has failed before. Even the existence of the test alludes to that. Getting a perfect score isn't guaranteed, and if she knew her name, for instance, it would be proof that they needed to go back to the operating table and make sure they got it right. This feels very Westworld fidelity test, but in like the exact opposite way, an infidelity test, if you will.
Great, off we go. Now to start, who are you?
That's the first question?
Question 2, in which U.S. state or territory were you born?
Wait.
Question 3, please name any U.S. state or territory.
Fuck.
First that comes to mind.
I don't know. Delaware.
Question 4. What is Mr. Egan's favorite breakfast?
That one makes no sense.
Right. To the best of your memory, what is or was the color of your mother's eyes?
Okay, what's happening?
Unknown.
The questions relating to her identity and the lack of knowledge about herself shows that the operation worked. The basic knowledge about the country highlights how she can retain the information that they allow. They need to know some basic things, and geographical locations are for some reason one of them. It could be just a grounding thing, or it could have more depth based on Tumwater and the names of the people, or I'm sorry, the names of the files that they're working on, right? They need to know where Delaware is for some kind of reason. We know that they need the basic things, like the severed half needs speech or societal dogma. Otherwise, they would walk in, quietly wonder why they needed to wear clothes and masturbate at their desk at least once a day, twice when they realized that everybody else was doing it. This geographical location question also made me think about the crazy tax breaks that Delaware gives corporations, but I have yet to link that to something meaningful in the show, other than the residual feeling that this company is about to take over the world, and Delaware rolling over despite its citizens needing their roads repaired will ultimately aid in a company regardless, taking over the world. Then they ask the question about Mr. Egan and his favorite breakfast, which she remembers intimately enough to know that question does not make sense, and this is why. He only drinks 3 raw eggs in milk every morning. Later, they do say that this was his favorite breakfast, but I think she says that it doesn't make sense because it is the only thing he has for breakfast. You can't have a comparative favorite because it would imply that other options exist. So she has that in her mind, but when they ask something as truly intimate as the color of her mother's eyes, nothing. I loved this scene, and starting off the series with this incredible off-putting performance of someone realizing that they can't remember who they are, 10 out of 10. The final 2 questions being next to each other is also intended to highlight that lack of humanity and the reverence that is Mr. Egan and how we should be considering who that is. She scores a perfect score, indicating that she is in the belly of the beast, and he enters the room. The way he is lit in this scene really makes me feel like they are trying to show us that feeling that Helly is feeling when seeing these big bad figures that run things behind the closed doors. Of course, we know it's Mark, this goofy man that on his first day of a new role is just trying his best. She sees a monster lurking in the shadows to control her life. It really makes me wonder about the bosses that Mark and the others report to still behind those closed doors, still appearing to them like monsters lurking in the shadows. I won't dive too much into this now, but I have some theories, of course, about who is really behind them being in this situation and the reasons why the big reveal for Helly is actually just the dude we already know. Which of course brings us to Audi Mark crying in his car before going into work, which, whew, buddy, been there. I have been there. He briefly checks his watch, realizes that it's 9 a.m., and he still needed to walk through this massive parking lot and go through security. The star at the top of the watch caught my attention, so I dug around for more details about this watch, and I found them. See description. It is a Russian make, and I think the star at the top is just meant to shape the world a little bit. Remind the audience about a authoritative regime or communist ruling overall. Not saying that Mark is either of those or supports either of those, but it is a bright red star on a watch of a crying member of the workforce, and I think that is meant to carry some weight. He puts on his badge, manually locks his vehicle, and walks into hell. He waits for permission to advance and then passes this monstrous image of Mr. Egan. This image, alongside the red star, builds that feeling that about what this company is and what they believe. They hold this man in high regard, and we are left to wonder why at this point. Also, fun fact, the Lumon building here is a real place. It is the Bell Labs Homedale complex. It was once used by Bell Labs and AT&T, but now hosts several smaller tech startups. I just thought this was so cool and wanted to share with y'all. Mark continues his walk into the depths, leaving all his belongings behind, and trades the badge with his bright, shining face on it for one with no life and no love. He gets wanded at 9:04, and I think this point is actually massive. They later tell us that the elevators have tech that can read written language, but he has to be wanded for spare pocket change. Seems like maybe it's worth doubting the written language detector for more than just the obvious of how outlandish it seems. This, of course, brings us to the hallways. Mark, center frame, this music playing. I love this moment. Walking through a labyrinth. His ability to know where to go is something that could only come with experience, and that is the point. It's security via obfuscation. Someone enters here without permission or prior knowledge of everything. They would have no idea where to go or how to get to where they actually wanted to be. This brings us to MacroData Refinement. We see a room with very little, desks and a clock, one far image of an idol that we still need to learn more about, but nothing to distract them from the work. It is joyless. The desks here are just pixels away from being a swastika. Should each of them be slightly more right in their desks or accessing their drawers, they would just form the symbol. It's more set design meant to elicit this feeling of authoritative control that is too overarching, inherently malicious or flawed, and it is doomed to fail, but it's an impressive force nevertheless. It's something to overcome. They are trying to establish a boogeyman for us. Even the picture of Egan on the wall represents how every home in North Korea must have the dead leaders' portraits on their most prominent wall. Mark says that PD was sniffling yesterday. This was the man who was fired. And I think that point may be worth remembering because we know he was sniffling because of the symptoms of the unsevering procedure. I personally think they are hinting that, he spent at least a single day unsevered on this floor before quitting, but we don't really have, confirmation of that. And I think that may be a season 2 thing. We meet Dylan with a witty retort and Irving with a legendary,
"Hi kids, what's for dinner?"
God damn it, Irv.
Truly an iconic line. I love this. Anybody says this, you immediately know what they're talking about, right? We hear some notes about the incentives offered for a job well done and see some of the work they do. It's nothing remotely close to a job that anybody has ever had, at least nothing I'm familiar with, and that is 100% the point. We learn here that Creamer was once something that Irving was given as a reward. This and a few other things that happen throughout the season shape a generational difference between the past and present severed workplace cultures. In some regard, you can take this as becoming more of an incentive because Creamer is now a given while waffles are coveted. But in reality, it's about moving the goalposts so that the players have a bigger field to run across in order to celebrate. Untouched waffle makers will someday sit in their kitchenette like they would at a rundown hotel. Then the next generation will talk about how crazy incentivizing waffles was at their quarterly pizza party. It is amazing. We get some nice screen grabs of the operation, some of the good or bad number binning. We also have a different keyboard. The mouse is embedded and it comes with these 3 strange buttons. A lot of this really isn't worth diving further into because it's just set design meant to be obscure. I mean, it's not like, I wouldn't. Why would I go through all the trouble of spending like an entire night trying to figure out what these hex values correlate to, when I could have just shown you how cool it looks, right? These buttons here and the way in which the numbers go in and out give me an overwhelming feeling of water. In fact, the Lumon icon here features that. It's not obvious what MacroData Refinement actually does, and we will probably be pondering that each episode all the way until the end of Season 2, if I had to guess, but it seems like it could be water related. After some good back and forth, in walks Mr. Milchick. This establishes a bit of the hierarchy inside of the severed workplace. He has authority over Mark and MDR, and we will learn, other departments as well. And of course, this takes us to Miss Cobel, who also has authority over them. Both of these exchanges are these half compliment, half insult, jabs, right? Miss Cobel just outright stating how bad he looks, but with context, she's actually saying that she's blaming his Audi. Like, dang, like this happened to you, not it's that you specifically look bad. Either way, Mark is hearing how bad he looks after a morning without that thought at all. This is when we meet the board, this mythical little box with a remote user that may or may not exist at all. It is the same little box that Helly spoke to Mark with, and based on how this conversation goes, we are left wondering, is there a higher authority on the call, or do the middle managers use this like a weapon against their subordinates? Or is the higher authority just another version of Mark or anybody else frantically swiping through a very verbose protocol page, stressed and desperate not to disappoint their own mythical little box that tells them what to do? This theme is one of my favorites, and it continues throughout the entire season. And yeah, we have no idea. Does the board exist? Who is the board? Is there someone on that line that is enforcing a protocol, and who's enforcing a protocol on them? I love that we don't ever really know. I hope that continues for a good bit, because again, that's the boogeyman, right? That's how you create this drama of what will happen or not. Mark learns that PD was let go, and the scene is really a mix of emotions before he stands up straight and accepts PD's old job. They can't tell him anything about his old friend because it would be against PD's NDA, and he doesn't have an option to press against that further. He trades out his lesser badge for the more important one, and the veil between those is best highlighted with the fact that they're just the same card. He then requests a handshake, which is just, a shocking thing. This was a great world building moment on my first watch because my mind raced with how touch deprived these individuals must be. This being atypical made me wonder if they would, covet human touch between them eventually. A simple touch of the hand can mean anything or nothing at all. And while I won't spoil anything that happens outside of this episode, this is where they start building that tension about workplace contact. Mark puts his big boy voice on and pretends to know what he's doing until they get into this covert little recycling friendly room and he starts going over the material. He has doubts about the protocol right away and asks Mr. Milchick if he can just talk to her. Of course, he cannot. Irving is shadowing Mark and we get some really great shots of the material that he is reading through. The thing that just utterly grabbed my attention during this review, though, is this sticky note. I just thought this was neat and we probably don't need to, spend any time diving into it. I just wanted to, again, briefly show y'all and move on. All right, get the tinfoil. We see the Lumon logo completely blacked out, shooting stars in some kind of mountain range or waveform. Page 19 underlined that turns into a spiral which runs out of space. Some kind of code that equals SR. Another code that resembles PlayStation controls until we get to this upside down triangle and then it becomes a little bit of nothing. Then a list that starts with Mr. Reynolds, flame retardant, and go home or go hone the long way. There is so much to dive into on this one. I cannot stress how long I spent looking at this. Starting off, I believe that this is a note from Petey, left here for either Mark as a clue or himself as a reminder of something that went wrong previously, or maybe something relating to his last day at work here. Mr. Reynolds is a character we have not met, and SR doesn't appear to have a meaningful link to anything in the transcripts. I created a few regex searches to look for words or names starting with S and then R consecutively, and Senior Most Refiner was the only thing that really caught my eye. Supply Run could also be relevant. Shitty Ski Resort, maybe. Maybe Subscribe if you really want to get meta. It feels like the numbers could correlate to a tab on each book section, but I'm really not sure the significance. Perhaps doing them out of order once created the best Senior Refiner ever, and he wanted to remember that mishap. Perhaps S is the first initial of Mr. Reynolds' first name, and he was flame retardant after honing the long way. Also, this entire thing is a mystery and may very well be nonsense. Let me just say that. But such is life, right? The 86898789, the spiral, the PlayStation-ish cheat code on the right, the Murferg being capitalized, all makes me feel like this is a cipher of some kind. The MRFRGH could be the key to solving this, or again, it could just be my sleep deprivation, as I think I wrote this at like 3 a.m. I don't want to spend too much time on the PlayStation thing, so I will simply give my best guess after what was off-screen far too much time looking at this. The elevators here have these triangles, identical triangles. Upstairs goes down, downstairs goes up. Perhaps these were introspective doodles about Petey, the man who was just fired, being reflective of his journey. He started unsevered like everybody else upstairs. He felt whole, felt like he was put into a box, ultimately broken, and then sent himself down where he felt whole again, but then the repetition made that whole feeling contort until you couldn't determine if you were in a box or not. It could also relate to the master code that may or may not exist. It really does feel like this relates to his last day, and he was like meant to meet SR. We do meet a character later that's named Regabi, who interacts with Petey, so maybe it's that. In cryptography, a field in which I've been a hobbyist of for many years, we have something called a spiral cipher. Seeing the spiral and an odd number made me really consider if that's what was happening. Perhaps it's saying that there is a spiral cipher on page 19 in this code, either relates to how it's decoded, or SR means start right, as in like start the spiral right, defining which way ultimately the spiral would be oriented to read this secret text. The only issue is, to my best knowledge, we don't ever see that page. We do hear him read this passage a couple minutes later from page 19, but I wasn't able to decode this into anything meaningful. It was all really just nonsense. To front, back, everything, I really couldn't make it work here. If there is anything that can be taken away from this sticky note, it is the time and love they put into making this show feel like a world to explore instead of just a story to watch, and I give them props for that. In fact, Mr. Milchick gives Mark this book that he probably should have stripped of notes from Petey. It's odd that he didn't. And it's also odd that when Mark is asking for clarification about the process he is about to mess up, Mr. Milchick gives him bad advice.
So I'm supposed to start with just the input survey? Isn't that a little weird?
Just start at 1A and continue by line based on her answers.
Of course, it is not standard at all. He was meant to start with the preamble, but Mr. Milchick was being distracted by something he's doing behind the TV, and that led him to making this mistake. In fact, if we're looking for who is to blame for the Helly incident, it seems like at least some part of this is a failure of Mr. Milchick. They continue discussing the process, and we get this shot of the camera in the background that looks eerily similar to the Lumon logo of the water droplet, though in other shots it's not present. It really makes me think that the water drop logo is actually a camera lens, but I am just going to sit on that for now.
I just love seeing you all come in like this. Go on ahead when you're ready.
So the test goes pretty bad, and now we know why. Irving has clearly done this process before, or at least knows it better. It's odd that he wasn't given the reins over MDR and is only shadowing when he knows more of this process, is literally advising Mark when things go wrong. They eventually make it through, and we continue the story inside of the room together. Right away, she asks if she is livestock, and I got a good chuckle out of that. Helly is given the name Helly R, and we continue with the protocol. It's robotic, corporate humor to the point of cringe. Mark looks to the camera watching them, shaking in terror, and he is messing up, and of course, Helly is seeing all of this.
To start, imagine yourself as a seesaw. Ow!
After her great escape fails, he tries to be a little more real with her, puts the book down, and she calms down, and then Mark breaks protocol entirely. He gives a story about his time here instead and how he was going to kill the voice talking to him, which was Petey's voice. He's trying to be more human, but after getting stumped and wanting to resort back to the comfort of protocol, she rips the book from him. She asks to leave and exit once more, meeting the required 3 times, inexplicably 3 times, before she's able to actually leave. And that brings us to the venture in the stairwell. En route, they talk about all the empty space and how they are planning an expansion. This would be neat to see in season 2. They talk about leaving and how he isn't allowed to watch her leave, which is somehow creepier than watching her leave. I loved this moment with the inside and outside battle of wills, seeing her exit the first time and entering the same door to show the audience, their perspective explicitly. Loved. She then asks directly if this is hell, and again, love this. Helly meets with Miss Cobel as Mr. Milchick band-aids Mark's forehead. These two have a brief conversation about Mark messing up her orientation, and then Helly is given a video of her outside self consenting to the treatment that any Helly now experiences. Mark gets absolutely shafted by Miss Cobel, and it was so jarring compared to everything that has happened to this point. Great performance here. Chills. I love this. This snap. This is so quick. It just shows like that refined, that, I don't know, that's probably antiquated, but that going postal feeling, right? We then get the title of the episode explained when she details a story about hell being a product of imagination, but that shouldn't provide comfort because we can usually create what we can imagine. It is a great line. We then return to Helly R in MacroData Refinement watching her video. We hear Mr. Milchick's voice start the recording, showing us that he is also on the outside, and Helly sees herself say things that she has never heard. It is a haunted moment. Helly again consents to having her memories being split, and then comes to understand that she will never leave this place. We see Mark leave and become his outside self, leaving at 5:25. He notices a slightly different feel to his blank blue card before putting it down without another thought. He may think his card was replaced or, lost or something, but he would have no way to know that he was just promoted if they do not tell him, and we don't see that happen. His outside self consented to work, and probably for a flat fee. His inside self is taking on more work than he previously did, and that does not reflect the outside earning, and that point is never really addressed, but it it fascinates me. He could be the CEO of the company now inside, but his outside self would still drive home to the same subsidized house. He reads the card and sees the Band-Aid. To him, it is a mysterious injury repaid with a gift card to Pips. More on that a little bit later. He almost hits Helly, and both of them just look at each other like, dang, can't believe that happened, ultimately highlighting the fact that they do not truly know each other after spending the entire day with each other. And we see the building again with a logo that either means water or cameras. I think personally leaning to cameras at this point, but water again does present itself in quite a lot of ways here. His home is a duplex and slightly bigger than the one next to his, a point of importance because his superior lives there. Once inside, he drinks. We see these two fish representing the severed mind in a single tank and the general feeling of boredom that is cured by alcohol. We hear him talking to Miss Selvig about the trash cans, trying to establish who this person is to his outside life without revealing who it is right away. She is an old lady that confuses trash and recycling day and ultimately presents a minor inconvenience to him often. We then see his sister for the first time and they talk about the dinnerless dinner. This back and forth in the car, 10 out of 10. In fact, the sibling relationship throughout the episode, throughout the season, and how they talk to each other is just, it's my favorite. They laugh about Pips, and she says, of course it's Pips, because she knows that Pips was created by the Egan family, but more on that later. She presses him for information about his workplace wound, but he brushes it off. You can tell there is a point of contention here. She does not enjoy the decision he made to sever, but she will support her brother and throw jabs with that underlying truth whenever she can. We then meet Ricken and start the most pretentious dinner party of all time. It's ridiculous, enabling the incarnation of people wanting to be smart and carry that as a virtue. It is a room of fake smiles, too afraid to offend each other when they say something as stupid as food isn't life. In reality, I've heard these conversations. Each Ricken scene presents in a similar way, in fact. It's nonsense with tiny little fragments of truth underneath that if you start thinking hard enough, they make sense. Saying food isn't life and that explaining why they don't need to eat dinner is nonsense. But when you consider what he is really saying is that our most basic cellular form started by needing to consume others to survive, and that once made up all that life was, compare that to how it is now, and life is far more than just worrying about our next meal. We've escaped a system of how life could exist, and while we still need food to survive, eating food isn't everything we care about, even though without, we would die. It's something to think about, but that is the point. These scenes and later on his book are always shaped to sound ridiculous, but they contain nuggets of truth, and that is the entire point. But more on that in later reviews and how that could feed into a multi-generational culture shift within this world as... Yeah, I'm going to leave it there. As the meeting goes on, Ricken announces that Mark and Devon's father was an alcoholic. It's surely out of left field, but we know this thing runs in the family, and ultimately we see that it is also affecting Mark. We learn that Mark has a history teacher background before working at Lumon, and then this man drops a factoid about World War I, to which Mark unintentionally humbles him. They bring up his dead wife, and that he has been severed to work at Lumon. It silences the room. Ricken clearly is not the best socially. They talked briefly about what Lumon does, medical or technology. Nobody really truly knows what they do now, but they started in the 1900s selling like topical salves, but but that's about it, right? After they find out Mark was severed, it was like they wanted to inspect him, probe into his life because he did something they could never imagine doing. It carries this feeling of disgust with Mark, and that peaks with this man saying Mark's other self is trapped in Lumon. This conversation also gives us a simplified explanation of the severance process. In short, two sets of memories, one inside and one outside. They cannot access each other. That is how the outside liberal world views this procedure. Their inside selves are certainly trapped there. It becomes a point of contention, and this woman here has this to say.
So I suppose we know where you fall in the congressional goings-on.
It is a nasty line that escapes the veil of nicety everybody is putting on, and their true self kind of peeks out here. She embodies the current passive-aggressive venom just perfectly, and Ricken tries to save this moment with this here.
I think we may be missing the point here. Mark made a decision, and that decision was controversial, ethically, socially, morally, scientifically. But Mark, I stand behind you.
I definitely stand behind Mark.
And it's not the best, but ultimately they wrap up the non-food based dinner, which is just a hangout, and Devon apologizes for all of that. He seems fine, but will most certainly be giving her shit about this in the future. They talk about therapy and how Severance has helped him process what happened to his wife. We don't know much yet, but she passed away, and that was ultimately what drove him to need to turn his brain off for 8 hours a day. It is not the best way to cope, but neither are most of the ways we do it now. We learn that Ricken believes in 3 beds, and I have nothing to add to that. During the night, he sees Petey for the first time and then tells his sister about the business-suited man watching her house at night. Also, this never means anything, like ever, but this little knothole here, circle inside, I swear this is a camera. What is this, right? It's never addressed again in any capacity, but I thought this was a camera. Then we get my favorite shot of the first episode, the houses of the Lumon workers showcased next to the graves of the Lumon workers. It could be highlighting how there is little difference between those two things at Lumon. It could be showing the dull state of affairs and the inevitable march to the grave that they now face. Because we know some things in later episodes, it could mean more, but I won't say until then. It is just another shot that shows them, building this world. Corporate houses leading to corporate graves. Although, because the graves are oriented to the left, I want to highlight that this is actually corporate graves leading to corporate houses, and I think that is the ominous feeling they want us to take away from this. This, of course, brings us to the VIP area at Pips. Petey sits down and Mark realizes that this is the man of mystery. He says the signature line about kids and dinner and then starts explaining what is going on. Mark has a healthy amount of skepticism and affirms the company's stance that Severance is not reversible. Petey introduces the character Grainer by name, another mysterious figure that we and they should be cautious of. Petey leaves Mark with a note about not wanting to die and take all of his knowledge with him. He then casually delivers this line, which got a good chuckle out of me.
I'm your best friend. You're my very good friend.
The card is a long read, and I'll freeze the frame here so you can read it completely, but it's just explaining their friendship inside and the curiosity they had for the world outside. I believe this was Mr. Grainer pulling up behind him, but I'm not sure. Either way, it shows us the paranoia that Mark is getting from all of this. I tried to take this text and check to see if equally it could relate to the spiral cipher, but alas, nothing. Mark pulls into his driveway, and the episode ends with us finally meeting Mrs. Silvig. The reveal that it was Miss Cobel to finish the episode 10 out of 10. This was an incredible pilot episode that gave some great concepts, great writing, and a hook right at the end that made us wonder about the evil doings of a company that people are trying to escape, about the overreaching ways highlighted by him never truly being able to leave his boss's gaze. I remember wanting to know more about the world, about Miss Cobel, about Petey, and I was glad that the main character had just as little of an idea about what was going on as I did. Thank you, Morty. The story felt grounded in reality and like a bad moral tale about what happens if companies get too powerful. But with that, we come to the end of the video. Be sure to subscribe for more videos about Severance. My goodness, this was so good. There's so much to talk about with this show. I hope y'all will subscribe and ultimately talk about it with me. Hopefully, we will be able to complete all of Season 1 before Season 2 is released. Also, hopefully they release, episodically so that we can enjoy theory crafting together. I'm talking to you, Ben Stiller, fan of this channel and frequent commenter, Ben Stiller. Listen, please. The Severance community at large is just as passionate as the Westworld, Mr. Robot, and probably early Lost fandoms too. If you are looking for a new mystery-cloaked drama, this is the one. Given that I have spent a couple nights trying to be the first person to solve a sticky note code that may or may not exist, I'd say it's got me, right? This is so good. If you are here for Fallout videos and watch this entire video, that's pretty dope too. Thank you for that. Lucy's complete timeline is being worked on, but 2 years ago I promised a man named Michael Link over on Patreon that I would make these videos, and it's about time. Much love, everybody, and I cannot wait to talk to you all again soon. Okay, we're back. It's much sooner than I expected, but I have made about 20 to 30 revisions of this exact video that I finished 3 days ago, and YouTube won't just let me upload the video. It keeps flagging seconds or 6-second intervals and then telling me that like entire sections of the video are violating copyright content. But then I'll upload it, I'll fix issues, I'll re-upload it, trying to guess what they're, flagging on, and then it'll come back again and again and again. YouTube, please. Just let me post this video. It's all fair use. It is so clearly not the essence, the entirety, the, fidelity of the Severance episode 1, right? This is entirely fine to upload. Please stop telling me that 5 seconds of a video that I end on a screenshot is violating copyright. Like, that shit is so far from reality. The entire system is antiquated, and it's been like 3 days. Bro, it's been 3 days. I made this video. I was so excited to share this. And now I just keep having to update and spend an hour each time praying that it's going to work. My entire 3 days I've been sitting at this computer and going back and forth, just trying to get this to work. It's so infuriating. And I don't even have hope that after I make this will be the one that it works. I probably make this, I add this to it, and then another 10 revisions are going to go by, and then I'm ultimately going to realize that I'm never going to be able to cover Severance at all. Like, it really, truly feels like there is some issue with the show in particular, and because, like, in comparison to Westworld or Devs or Game of Thrones or Shogun or any of the other things that I do and cover in this exact same style, nothing is being has been so militant to the copyright content ID system. And my God, I